Chapter 25 of The Beautiful Mrs. Davenant by Violet Tweedale. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 25. Goodbye, sweetheart, goodbye. Mrs. Carleton was standing at the top of the staircase, welcoming one after another the county magnates and the smaller fry with the same indiscriminate friendliness. The women had come in all the glory of new frocks, which happier times had justified them in ordering, and the old family jewels, which for 5 years had lain in the cellars of banks, had been taken out and cleaned for the occasion. Many of the men wore pink, and thanked God they had done with khaki. Mrs. Carleton looked like no one else but herself, in the severity of her red velvet, her close-cropped iron-grey hair, and the single monocle screwed into one shrewd dark eye. But she had conformed to the importance of the evening by strewing a few fine diamonds among the laces at the throat of her long redingote. The small dance had developed into quite a big ball, as everyone within motoring distance had decided to emerge from the rust of war and treat the invitation as a command, thereby doing honour to a family of old standing whom all liked. Mrs. Carleton, with her extremely liberal views and independent nature, was an excellent hostess, possessing that thoroughbred ease which disarms the most critical assembly. She had the knack of saying those few words of polite conventionality in a way which made her guests feel welcome, yet which ensured their making way for the pressure from below, as carriages and motors deposited their loads at the wide-flung doors. By her side stood her son, well pleased with this splendid function, which had been of his ordering. He looked upon the whole affair as a duty he owed to the county in their desire for some diversion amid the monotony of country life and the severe restrictions and sorrows of the past. In a couple of days another ball, no less well provided, was to be given to the employees on the estate. The great house was brilliant with light and colour, and sweet with flower perfume. From the great drawing-room, never used but on such rare occasions, came waves of music, and through the great staircase window shone glimpses of the gardens lying bathed in cold, pure moonlight. "A charming sight," remarked Lord Leicester to Warburton, as they lounged against a balustrade, quizzing the various parties who mounted the stairs, watching the varied blendings of colours, the varied expression of faces, the glitter of jewels against the stately background of tapestry and pictures. "Is your sister not here to-night?" he asked the vicar, after congratulating him warmly on his engagement. "No, she didn't care to come. She never dances, and she's very occupied with Miss Thorne and her approaching marriage." "Ah, of course. What a change for the Lake House. A charming young couple who'll be a great acquisition to the neighbourhood, I hear," returned Leicester genially. "I can't help being rather sorry for the beautiful Mrs. Davenant." "Oh, you needn't," laughed Warburton. Leicester twinkled slyly. "Ah, you think she'll catch the prevailing epidemic and marry also?" "I'm quite certain she won't," answered the vicar with conviction. Leicester said no more. He was longing to stroll about the rooms and gossip with old acquaintances, but like Warburton there was one woman whom he wished to see arrive. There was another who watched eagerly for that coming, Claude Carleton. Hilda Davenant was late, considering it was a country affair, he thought impatiently, as a clock chimed 10 o'clock, and the stream of newcomers had very perceptibly thinned. "I think we may leave our post now. Everyone seems to have arrived," said his mother. The strains of music came floating out to them. It was on the tip of his tongue to remind her that the Dower House ladies had still to be accounted for, but he checked himself before the words passed his lips, and together they moved into the drawing-room. Dancing was in full swing. The house party had lost no time in getting to work, but he hesitated to dance himself. A nervous irritation possessed him. Hilda had answered his letters, but had evaded seeing him since his return. He was quite sure of his own mind, but not of hers. His chances were enormously improved by Miss Howard's engagement. Tonight he would put his fate to the test. It would be easy to make an opportunity. He stood watching the brilliant Sadie Hall jazzing energetically. He admired the perfect figure in its glittering yellow sheath. Diamonds crowned her dark hair and vied with the sparkling lustre of her eyes. "Here comes the beautiful Mrs. Davenant," said a strange voice behind him, and he wheeled around. Hilda was entering with Leicester by her side in animated conversation. They were followed by Agnes Howard and Warburton. Mrs. Carleton had caught sight of them, and the women were greeting each other with the greatest cordiality, while several men hovered in the background, eager to petition for a dance. Warburton and Agnes, directly she had shaken hands with her hostess, joined the dancing throng, and Carleton found himself standing before Mrs. Davenant, her hands in his. "I thought you'd never arrive," were the first words he found to say to her. "Are you going to dance with me?" "Oh, I hope so." Her lovely laughing eyes met his. Tonight she was the incarnation of gaiety. Leicester moved away. He had heard the words, but the look which accompanied them was far more significant. "Poor Claude, he's pretty far gone. Got it badly. How will it end? I think I know enough now to check anything so rash as marriage," he said to himself, as he made his way to the side of the Lord Lieutenant's wife, who was a distant relation. "Let us start dancing right away," suggested Carleton. But even as he spoke, the music came to an end, and the crowd began to thin at once as the dancers streamed out into the cool corridors. He drew her arm through his and whispered, "Give me at least half a dozen dances." Various claimants were now surging up, and there had been no time to lose. They would dance the next together. Pushing their way through the chattering groups, he drew her along the corridor, where they would at least be out of earshot. "Now," he demanded, "I want you to tell me honestly why you've never let me see you once, though I've been home for a whole week." She smiled back at him whimsically, perfectly prepared for the attack. "Honesty's a wretched virtue, Major Carleton. One never calls a woman honest who has any manners. We reserve the epithet for those of whom we have nothing good to say. Still, I like to be truthful. I had other things of more importance to do." "Things you liked better?" he insisted. "Things that I disliked extremely." "I want you always to be honest with me," he said with a sudden gravity. She maintained her smiling attitude of frivolity. "I wonder, do you realize the misery it would cause if everyone made it a virtue to parade themselves before their neighbours' horrified eyes in their true colours? Are any of us perfect enough to invite the world to look upon us as we really are? Supposing you told every woman you met what you really thought of her clothes and complexion." "And supposing you told me what onerous duties prevented you from seeing me when I called," he retorted, laughing in spite of his serious mood. "You wouldn't believe me if I did," she returned primly. "Now, let us cease sparring and begin to dance." They returned to the ballroom, and many pairs of eyes followed them. The women were interested in Mrs. Davenant's fine jewels. The men were interested in her great beauty and grace. She waltzed with all her heart. As a young actress she had trained indefatigably, and now the pure delight of movement returned to her as she glided round to the rhythm of a first-rate band. Her partner was all that the best of dancers could possibly desire, and she uttered an expression of genuine regret when the music ceased. "Oh, that was heavenly, and how well you dance! I shall look forward to perhaps one more turn later on, but it is your solemn duty to dance with no woman twice tonight out of the many who are your guests." "Solemn duty be damned," thought Carleton, as he surrendered her to her next partner. If she imagined he would be thwarted by conventional rot of that sort, she was much mistaken. The crowd on the floor was great now, and after a few turns with Mrs. Hall they paused to take breath. A few elderly women sat at one end of the room near their hostess, but every man under 80 was dancing with the zest of 20.
"How times have changed," laughed Carlton. "Why, before 1914 all these old busters would have been chaffed off the floor. But now their energy seems quite natural."
Sadie's eyes were following Hilda and a young diplomat, who was one of the house party. The music had glided into the hesitation valse, and many couples drew to the side to watch the few who were equal to the new movement. Mrs. Davenant and her partner were perfectly matched, and their dancing was something more than a drawing-room performance. "I've never seen her look so beautiful. And where on earth did she learn to dance like that?" burst out Mrs. Hall in a spasm of admiration. "Her jewels must be worth a big fortune. The late lamented Mr. D. must have been worth a mighty pile of dollars. They say Miss Howard has 10,000 a year. I wonder where it came from."
"Better ask Warburton," retorted Claude crossly. "I'll wager it comes from no tainted source. The vicar isn't the man to share ill-gotten gains."
After supper, as the ball wore on to a close, Carlton began to weary of it. He had only succeeded in dancing twice with Hilda, despite all his efforts, and repeatedly he had been balked of sitting out with her. Whenever he approached, it was only to find her surrounded or sitting in a corner engrossed in conversation it would be impossible to interrupt. In despair he ordered the band to announce an extra, and at once began to search for her. He had not far to seek. She was with the master in one of the small sitting-out rooms, and he proffered his request and bid Captain Hall begone, with the unceremoniousness of old friendship. When they were alone, he made no movement to return to the ballroom, but threw himself down on the sofa by her side. The beating of her heart quickened. All evening she had told herself these were her last hours of happiness and youth. When she had parted from Claude Carlton, she would have said good-bye to all the lighter side of life. She would have had her last love affair, and her feet would be set upon the path leading to sober middle age. A turning point in her destiny was before her. There was no escape, and she braced herself to meet it.
"Life's a queer thing," he was saying seriously. "I thought I'd enjoy this dance awfully. And now it's almost over, I'm happier now than I've been all night."
His eyes were looking straight into hers, and she had some difficulty in dissimulating the effect his words had upon her.
"The truth is, I'm never happy away from you, Hilda. I've loved you from the first moment your voice fell upon my ears, though at first I didn't realize what had happened to me. There's but one thing in my life now, and that's my love for you. That's madness, if you like. I'd have said so, too, before I met you. Mine is a tale you must often have heard before. So lovely a woman as you are doesn't go through life without having crowds of men at her feet. Now, what are you going to say to me in reply?" As she listened, all the brightness and warmth went out of her face, and her lips parted as if to draw breath was oppressive. His words vibrated with intense earnestness. They pierced her as no other words of supplication had ever done. She had expected this interview, known it must come, yet how much harder it was than she had anticipated. "You give me great pain. All I can trust is that your love for me is of such sudden birth that it will die as rapidly." He interrupted her brusquely. "You mean that you give me no hope?"
She looked straight into his eyes. She was too truthful to conceal from him that under other conditions she might have allowed her heart to go out to him with a softer impulse than mere friendship. "Oh, it is terrible that through me you should suffer. Do not think me without feeling, without sympathy."
"These are not love," he broke in again.
"I cannot give you love, because there is that in my life that forbids it. There is no more to be said." So greatly did she desire his deliverance that she could no longer speak calmly. There was a ring almost of passion in her voice.
"I'm ready to swear there is nothing in your life that you need be ashamed of."
It was not an interrogation, but an affirmation. "Think me guilty or guiltless as you will, I cannot answer you," was the quiet reply.
"You are innocent enough, whatever circumstances may have arrayed against you, whatever shadow of evil may have fallen on you. Is it not so?"
There was not a single intonation of doubt in his voice, and in a sudden wild impulse she stretched out her hand to him with a gesture of simple eloquence. "I have done what the world would utterly condemn, though I have no shadow of regret. But my life has been such that any man linked with it now would inevitably suffer. There must have been many occasions in which you have heard me referred to as a woman with a past. By that people mean something secret and hidden. The world speaks truly for once. In my past there is that which always must be hidden. People wonder why I have never remarried, and whisper there must be a reason which forbids it. They're right. If I wish to marry again, I could not do so honourably. Therefore I shall remain widowed to the end of my life."
"I should never care what the world said of you. You'd be my wife, and I have love enough to suffice for us both."
The word widowed sprang up like a flame of light in his heart. Secretly he had always dreaded that her husband still lived. But the flame of hope died down as he saw the settled melancholy in her face. "In common honour I can never become any man's wife, because there is a secret in which other innocent persons are involved, a secret I can confide to no one, not even to you, who love me so well that you trust me." Her head drooped, and tears gathered in her eyes. In that moment all the regrets in her life seemed to pass. She had at least his faith. Would this faith live on, without one sign to show she deserved it? He listened to her silently, meditatively. Most men of the world would have thought that guilt certainly spoke in her confession, though in their infatuation they might not have greatly cared. But Carlton did not so think. His sympathies were too wide and true.
"I listen to you, Hilda," he answered gently, "but I do not believe you, even against yourself."
All the courage within him rose in revolt to fling off even the shadow of actual sin upon the woman he loved. His eyes met hers without wavering.
"I do not ask to share your secret. You say it concerns others. Then what is it to me? I trust you absolutely. Will you not trust me?"
"I cannot accept so great a sacrifice. Oh, it's very noble. But how could we live as man and wife with this great gulf between us, which I should always try to prevent your bridging? Let us speak no more of this. What can it avail except to make you suffer greater things?" A bitter exclamation broke from him.
"Yours are noble words, but it's so easy to utter them, so hard to follow them. If you cared for me," he went on stormily, "you would know that there is not one thought in me that does not honour you. If you cared, you would not bid me forget my love for you."
"Those are wild, unconsidered words," she rebuked him gravely. "What good can they serve? As your friend—"
"Friendship is as cruel as hate," he vehemently retorted. "It's the worst cruelty. When I ask for bread, you offer me a stone."
There was sharp suffering in his voice, and she was moved and shaken by the despairing hopelessness that rang in it. "You only pain and wound me," she said very gently, "and I can hardly tell how to answer you. My life has been a very sad and complicated one, and I have suffered terribly. Only latterly have I known any real peace of mind. But nothing can ever alter the past. It is irrevocable." She spoke calmly, unfalteringly, but with a firm resolve. "Do you not believe that if I could speak with honour I would reward your faith by telling you all?" A flush passed over his face. He understood her.
"Oh, but," he urged with sudden gentleness, "may it not be that you overrate the obligations of honour? I know that many a noble-hearted woman has inexorably condemned herself to a severity of rule that a wide-minded judge of life would deem exaggerated, unnecessary. May this not be so with you?" His voice shook over the last words. He could not think with calmness of the destiny he was bidden to accept. He had believed that if only she were free, he could rouse her heart and make her love him. He knew now that she was a widow, and his greatest fear was banished. "Hear me," he entreated softly. "Is it not possible that you exaggerate the abnegation required of you? Yours is magnificent magnanimity, but it may surely be false justice to yourself and to me." "It is stern justice, but absolute," she answered him. "What is done is done. I cannot redeem the past by adding dishonour to it." The baffled sense of impotence against a wall of immovable calamity came over him. He had always been used to have his way with women, to see obstacles disappear, difficulties crumble. His good looks, his wealth and position, his easy charm, had made life very simple for him. He had been tried by no sorrow, until now had never known a woman whom he desired to make his wife. The sense that here was a tragedy whose meaning he could not fathom, that there was here a fate he could not change, brought a wholly unfamiliar sense of weakness that could not be altered by his will. It came to him that this woman who owned such great beauty, who bore such a serene habit beneath the world's harshest stings, would not have rejected his love unless compelled by a destiny from which there was no escape. A long silence fell between them. Where she lay back amongst the cushions, her face was in shadow, whilst he sat at her side motionless, his head bent upon his breast. She watched him many moments, he unconscious of her gaze, and whilst she did so, many conflicting emotions passed over the pale delicacy of her features. Her eyes were filled and shadowed by retrospection. She was quite unshaken in her resolve. Not even Agnes Howard realised how firm was her determination to do him no wrong. The woman who had been the mistress of another for 2 years, and who had accepted a fortune at his death, whose husband had been a felon, and who held the secret of the lake-house locked in her breast, was no wife for the young owner of Great Glentworth. I took my life in my own hands and defied the world. Love and Cecil Howard were what I deliberately chose. I must abide the consequences. One cannot have it both ways, she told herself, when she thought of what might have been, with a bitter-sweet regret. She was a woman still young. She had the ardour of youth still in her veins, and the desolation of abandoned youth in her heart. Honour looked cold beside love. The muffled rumble of homeward-bound motors rose up from the frozen moonlit roads. His guests were going home, and Claude was not there to bid them good-bye. He had forgotten their existence. A clock struck 3, and she rose. "I'm going home now. I'm very tired," she said. Her voice faltered for a moment, and then she recovered herself. "You say my offer of friendship is cruel, but at least it will be faithful to you. I believe in you as you believe in me, and that is the highest trust that one human being can show to another. And now, good-bye." He took her hands in his and held them against his breast, while he looked down into the pathos of the beautiful eyes raised to his. "Oh, don't think me indifferent, even to what seems to me so cold, Hilda," he whispered. "I believe in your innocence as firmly as though you substantiated it with 1,000 proofs. I reverence your devotion to honour. If I could not at least say that, I would be unfit to live. So this is goodbye to love, and goodbye to you for a time. Oh, but my darling, when I am able, I will claim the friendship you offer, but not now. It's impossible." In a long silence they looked into each other's eyes, and he knew at last what their parting was costing her. The suffering was not only his. "For the first and last time, Claude,"
she whispered, and he bent his lips to hers. End of chapter 25. End of The Beautiful Mrs. Davenant by Violet Tweedale. Read by Anne Fletcher, Queensland, Australia, 2023.